Midtown Manhattan was a relentless, unforgiving beast, a concrete and glass leviathan perpetually in motion. It was an urban landscape obsessed with speed, efficiency, and quantifiable metrics, where every second counted, and every inch of asphalt was a battleground for progress. The air, thick with the exhaust of a million vehicles and the faint tang of hot asphalt, vibrated with the constant blare of horns, the insistent whine of sirens, and the hurried footsteps of millions. Here, life moved at a breakneck pace, driven by the invisible currents of digital navigation, with every smartphone screen displaying the fastest route, every pedestrian's pace dictated by the next appointment. There was a general, unspoken disdain for anything that dared to deviate from this optimized path, for any method that didn't promise immediate results. Anonymity was a given, and human interactions were largely transactional. Quick exchanges defined by fleeting destinations and rapidly calculating fares. Amidst this relentless, unforgiving urban ballet, Leo Maxwell drove. His taxi, a well-worn, slightly rattling yellow cab that seemed to have absorbed the very essence of the city's cacophony, was his sanctuary and his cage. Leo, a man in his late 50s, was a veteran driver, a relic from a time when GPS was a distant dream and a taxi driver's true asset was an encyclopedic knowledge of the city's arteries and veins. He was known amongst a dwindling few regulars for his quiet demeanor, his almost old-world courtesy, and his uncanny, almost intuitive knowledge of the city's hidden shortcuts and secret rhythms, routes that bypassed the obvious, that sometimes felt longer but somehow always felt smoother. He was a stark contrast to the aggressive, GPS-reliant younger drivers who cursed every red light and navigated solely by the cold, impersonal voice of an algorithm. Leo's days unfolded with a quiet, predictable rhythm, a solitude that extended beyond the confines of his cab. His meals were sparse, solitary affairs consumed in the dim corners of greasy midtown diners, the clatter of cutlery, and the low murmur of strangers his only company. He'd eat slowly, savoring each bite, his gaze often distant, lost in the shifting kaleidoscope of the city outside the grime-streaked windows. He preferred cash to digital payments, the crisp feel of paper money, a tangible comfort in an increasingly cashless world. He never checked his phone for directions, his internal map, honed over decades, proving infinitely more reliable than the fleeting recommendations of a satellite. His traditional methods, however, were a constant source of frustration for his passengers, especially those who were slaves to their screens. He often encountered impatient sighs from business executives staring furiously at their GPS, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their devices. "Driver, why are we going this way? My app says turn left here. It's faster." They'd snap, their voices sharp with irritation. Leo would offer a polite, "Just a feeling, sir, ma'am. Trust me." His gaze fixed on the road, knowing explanations were often futile. The younger drivers at the taxi depot openly mocked his old-school ways. They called him Grandpa GPS or the human map. They'd scoff at his non-reliance on apps, their laughter echoing through the cavernous garage. "Hey, Leo, lost your phone again." "Old man," one might jeer, holding up his own gleaming device. Leo would simply offer a faint, tired smile, his dignity intact. He knew his methods were different, perhaps even strange, but they worked. They had always worked. His dispatch manager, Ms. Albright, a strict, data-driven individual whose every decision was dictated by metrics and algorithms, frequently reprimanded him. Her office, stark and sterile, smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. "Leo," she'd state, her voice devoid of inflection, her eyes fixed on the glowing monitor displaying his route logs. "Your efficiency scores are down. Route deviations. Mr. Maxwell, your last fare, from Grand Central to JFK, took an additional 7 minutes and 2.3 miles compared to the optimal GPS route. Your passenger still arrived on time." "Yes, and safely. But these are inefficiencies we cannot tolerate. It affects our bottom line. You need to adhere to the recommended routes, or we'll have to reconsider your assignments." The interaction was a stark confirmation of his image as an outdated, inefficient relic, a lone analog anomaly in a purely digital system. He was a cog that didn't quite fit. Yet, despite the constant ridicule, the dismissive glares, and the mounting pressure from dispatch, Leo Maxwell harbored a profound, unwavering integrity and quiet compassion. One sweltering afternoon, he found a wallet on his back seat, fat with cash and credit cards, along with a passport. It belonged to a panicked tourist he had just dropped off at Times Square. Without a moment's hesitation, Leo turned his cab around, fighting through the snarled traffic, and located the distraught man frantically retracing his steps. The tourist, overwhelmed with relief, tried to press a thick wad of bills into Leo's hand as a reward. Leo, with a gentle smile and a shake of his head, simply refused. "Just glad I could help, sir." "Stay safe." He drove off, leaving the bewildered tourist behind, his conscience clear. On his regular evening route, he often saw an elderly, disoriented woman, bundled in too many layers, wandering near a bus stop, clearly lost. He would pull over, his meter silently off, and offer her a free ride to her assisted living facility in Queens, making sure she was safely inside before driving away. He knew her name, Martha, and she knew his, a rare personal connection in the impersonal city. He might also quietly buy a hot meal for a homeless man he regularly saw huddled under the Manhattan Bridge, slipping it to him with a quiet nod. No words exchanged, just a simple act of human kindness. These quiet acts, unseen by Ms. Albright or his mocking colleagues, demonstrated a deep, hidden wellspring of inherent value for humanity that transcended monetary gain or efficiency metrics. He was a quiet guardian, his compassion a light in the often dark urban landscape. Leo carried a small, smooth river stone in his pocket, worn smooth by countless years of handling. It was a dark, unassuming pebble, but to Leo, it was a quiet talisman, a connection to something ancient and grounded. He would often rub it between his thumb and forefinger when he felt a familiar, subtle shift in the city's pulse. He often glanced intently at specific structural elements of bridges or tunnels as he drove over or through them. A slight tremor in the steel of the Queensboro Bridge, a barely perceptible shift in the concrete of the Lincoln Tunnel. He noticed them. A subtle, almost imperceptible frown would cross his face, a fleeting concern. He might make cryptic comments to himself, or to the empty seat beside him, about the city's bones, or the whispers of the steel, phrases he attributed to a lifetime spent navigating the urban labyrinth. More profoundly, he occasionally experienced fleeting, almost subliminal sensations, a specific low vibration in the steering wheel, an almost imperceptible shift in air pressure within the cab, a strange, guttural hum that only he seemed to hear, a dissonant chord beneath the city's perpetual roar. These sensations were particularly pronounced when approaching certain major structures, bridges, tunnels, elevated train tracks. He attributed these to just a feeling, an accumulation of decades of experience, a veteran driver's intuition. But they were subtly more than that, hinting at an unusual, almost empathic connection to the city's vast, complex, and aging infrastructure. It was as if he could feel the very stresses within the concrete, the subtle fatigue within the steel, the unseen currents of the city's underlying systems. This was his secret, his unprovable talent, the quiet seed of a mystery that waited for a moment of profound crisis to reveal its true, life-saving significance. The rattle and hum of Midtown were not just noise to Leo, they were a complex, almost living symphony. And he, the old taxi driver, was one of the few who truly understood its deepest, most hidden notes. The relentless rhythm of Midtown, a symphony of hurried steps and blaring horns, continued its frantic cadence. For Leo Maxwell, it was just another Tuesday afternoon, another shift in the yellow cab he had come to know better than his own small apartment. He navigated the gridlocked avenues with the practiced ease of a seasoned veteran, his internal map always one step ahead of the digital voice that barked orders from passenger phones. He was looking for his next fare, expecting the usual hurried executive or bewildered tourist, when his dispatch system pinged a pickup on Fifth Avenue, a high-priority, time-sensitive ride to JFK Airport. The address led him to a towering skyscraper, its glass facade reflecting the chaotic dance of the city below. From its polished lobby emerged Ms. Evelyn Reed, a woman who epitomized the ruthless efficiency of corporate New York. In her late 40s, sharp-suited and impeccably composed, she exuded an aura of powerful, no-nonsense authority. She held a sleek, ultra-thin laptop in one hand and a smartphone clutched in the other, both glowing with the relentless demands of her meticulously planned schedule. She barely glanced at Leo as she slid into the back seat, her voice clipped and precise. JFK. Terminal 4, she instructed, her eyes already fixed on her phone. My flight departs in 2 hours. I'm already cutting it close. I need absolutely no delays. I expect you to take the fastest possible route. My GPS is already active, so I'll be monitoring your progress. Her tone was a polite but firm warning, a clear signal that she would tolerate no deviation, no inefficiency. She embodied the fast-paced, unforgiving nature of Midtown, her very presence a challenge to Leo's more intuitive methods. Yes, ma'am, Leo replied, his voice calm, acknowledging the implicit threat. He pulled away from the curb, merging into the relentless flow of Fifth Avenue traffic, his brain already calculating the most optimal routes, considering traffic patterns, historical bottlenecks, and even the subtle vibrations the city always communicated, began to work. The standard and digitally recommended. Route to JFK involved taking the Midtown Tunnel, then merging onto the Long Island Expressway, a direct, brutalist artery of concrete and speed. It was the route every app would recommend, the route everyone expected. As Leo approached the entrance to the Midtown Tunnel, a route he had driven countless times, a familiar sensation began to manifest, subtle at first, then intensifying with alarming speed. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, nor a tremor he could point to. It was a specific, low vibration in the steering wheel, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate not from his cab's engine, but from the very concrete beneath them. It was accompanied by an almost imperceptible shift in air pressure within the cab, a subtle tightening, as if the air itself was straining. And then, a strange, guttural hum, a dissonant chord beneath the city's perpetual roar, a sound that only he seemed to perceive, rising from the unseen depths of the tunnel structure. It was a sense of immense structural strain, a feeling of deep-seated fatigue in the very bones of the city. He couldn't explain it logically, but it was an undeniable, primal warning. This was the profound inner struggle. Every fiber of his professional being screamed at him to continue on the expected route. He knew the deviation would lead to a scolding from Ms. Albright, a scathing complaint from Ms. Reed, and a direct hit to his already precarious financial livelihood. He imagined the precise words Ms. Reed would use in her complaint, the icy tone of Ms. Albright's reprimand. He grappled with the scientific absurdity of his feeling versus the undeniable, overwhelming conviction of his intuition. It was a battle between logic and instinct, between quantifiable data and an unprovable sixth sense. But the sensation was overwhelming, a painful internal alarm he could not ignore. It was more than a vague unease. It was a visceral, almost agonizing empathy with the unseen stresses within the massive structure. His hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. This unexplainable feeling, this primal warning, was overriding all other considerations. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. With a sudden, decisive jerk of the steering wheel, Leo veered right, away from the tunnel entrance, into a much smaller, seemingly innocuous side street. It was a drastic deviation from the expected path, committing them to a significantly longer, more circuitous route across the city, far from the digitally recommended expressways. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this decision would put his job, and possibly his entire livelihood, at severe risk. Ms. Reed, who had been engrossed in her laptop, snapped her head up. Her eyes, usually cool and calculating, narrowed into furious slits as she saw their trajectory on her phone's GPS. "Driver, what are you doing?" Her voice, normally controlled, was now sharp with incredulity and anger. "You just missed the tunnel entrance. My GPS clearly indicates the Midtown Tunnel is the fastest route. Are you trying to rip me off?" Leo glanced in the rearview mirror, his face a mask of quiet determination. "Apologies. Ma'am, I'm taking an alternate route. Trust me, it's for the best." "Ms." Reed scoffed, her disbelief escalating into outright fury. "For the best? My international flight departs in 90 minutes. This is not for the best. You are taking a ridiculously long detour. This is outrageous. I will report you. I will personally ensure your license is revoked. You'll never drive a cab in this city again, and I will demand a full refund, plus compensation for my missed flight and all associated losses." Her voice, usually so composed, had risen to a furious crescendo, filling the cab with palpable tension. She began furiously tapping on her phone, clearly preparing to file an immediate complaint, the glow of her screen illuminating her enraged face. Leo knew this was not a bluff. Ms. Reed's words, her threats, carried the weight of her corporate power. She could, and would, ruin him. He felt the familiar pang of fear, the anxiety of financial ruin, but the unshakable conviction, the overwhelming feeling emanating from the unseen depths of the city, was stronger. He could not turn back. He was now irrevocably committed to this longer, inexplicable route. The argument escalated, Ms. Reed's voice growing shriller, her accusations more personal. But Leo, despite the rising threats, continued his chosen path, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, driven by an unshakable, yet utterly unprovable, conviction. He accelerated through a yellow light, cutting through a forgotten back street, the city's concrete heart beating a discordant rhythm in his hands. He was a man driven by an unseen force, gambling his entire future on a feeling, a whisper from the steel and concrete that only he could hear. The confined space of Leo's taxi felt less like a vehicle and more like a pressure cooker, filled with the stifling heat of Ms. Evelyn Reed's fury. Her voice, sharp and cutting, continued its relentless assault, each word a direct blow to Leo's already battered professional standing. She clutched her smartphone, its screen a glowing testament to her meticulously planned, now derailed schedule, her thumb hovering over the ride-sharing app's complaint button. "This is unbelievable," she seethed, her gaze fixed on the GPS map that insisted, with digital certainty, that they were miles off course. "My assistant is texting me. I'm going to miss my connection. Do you have any idea how much this flight costs? How much my time costs?" Leo, his grip on the steering wheel unwavering, kept his eyes fixed on the labyrinthine streets of Midtown, his internal compass guiding him through a maze known only to him. He could feel Ms. Reed's rage like a physical heat emanating from the back seat. Yet a more profound, chilling sensation was beginning to manifest. As they passed beneath an old, disused, elevated subway line, its rusted steel skeleton casting long, skeletal shadows over the street, an intense, almost painful vibration coursed through Leo's hands, not from the road, but from the metal above. It was a guttural groan, a deep, resonant cry that seemed to echo through his very bones, a sound that only he seemed to perceive beneath the city's incessant drone. "The tracks, they're screaming," Leo muttered, almost to himself, his brow furrowed in concentration. He felt an overwhelming urge to pull over, to inspect the crumbling concrete supports, to verify the unseen agony of the aging structure. "Ms. Reed snapped. "Screaming driver, are you feeling all right? This is absurd. Pull over. I'm calling the police." But then, as they cleared the elevated tracks and approached an old, forgotten railway bridge, its steel girders silhouetted starkly against the polluted sky, the sensation intensified. It wasn't just a vibration now. It was a sickening twist in his gut, a metallic taste blooming on his tongue, as if he could taste the stress in the steel itself. A sudden, almost violent jerk of the steering wheel. Leo slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing in protest, throwing Ms. Reed forward against her seatbelt. The cab shuddered to a halt, centimeters from a crumbling concrete barrier. "What in God's name are you doing now, Ms.?" Reed shrieked, her face white with a mixture of terror and unadulterated fury. Leo didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed, not on the road ahead, but on a specific support pillar of the old railway bridge, barely visible through the urban clutter. He pointed, his hand trembling slightly. The stress points. They're tearing. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, his unusual vision discerning something imperceptible to the average eye. See it just above that old graffiti, a hairline crack in the concrete support, and hear it, a faint, metallic creak, almost a sigh, from that distant girder. He wasn't speaking to Ms. Reed, but describing a truth only he could perceive, a truth born from his uncanny, almost psychic connection to the city's vast, intricate infrastructure. This was the controlled unveiling of his unique talent. He was not boastful, not seeking validation. He was simply stating what his senses screamed at him. Ms. Reed followed his gaze, squinting. She saw nothing but a grimy concrete pillar. Her outrage momentarily gave way to bewilderment. Was he mad? Or was this some bizarre scam she wanted to dismiss it? But the sheer conviction in his voice, the uncharacteristic urgency in his demeanor, gave her pause. Still, her immediate reaction was one of outrage. A crack. A creak. "Driver, you're deranged. You nearly caused an accident. I'm calling the authorities right now." She fumbled with her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. But even as she threatened, her analytical mind, trained to meticulously document flaws and evidence in her own corporate world, subconsciously compelled her to act. With a quick, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist, she secretly took a photo of the defect with her phone, zooming in, simply to gather evidence for her complaint, a tangible piece of proof for her impending legal action against this erratic driver. It was a purely logical, adversarial act, yet it would become the linchpin of an unimaginable truth. News of Leo's eccentric behavior and Ms. Reed's formal complaint, which she filed immediately upon reaching JFK, still seething with fury over the missed flight connection, and the prolonged, bewildering ride traveled swiftly through the highly interconnected, if now digitally crippled, urban network. The story, embellished by Ms. Reed's powerful connections and the public's thirst for drama, quickly reached the office of Mayor Jenkins and, more critically, the head of the Department of Transportation, Mr. Harrison. Mayor Jenkins, a shrewd politician grappling with the unprecedented challenges of the post-EMP city, saw the narrative as a potential public relations nightmare. A disgruntled, possibly unstable taxi driver making sensational claims about city infrastructure was the last thing he needed. Mr. Harrison, the head of the DOT, was a rigid bureaucrat, a man whose entire career was built on data, protocols, and predictable outcomes. He was a Type B antagonist, initially well-meaning in his dedication to public safety, but utterly arrogant in his belief that only quantifiable data could ensure it. He dismissed Leo as a disgruntled, possibly mentally unstable, driver trying to scam passengers, or worse, a dangerous purveyor of misinformation. Mr. Harrison immediately ordered a full investigation into Leo's license and employment. He bypassed the usual lengthy procedures, citing reckless driving, passenger endangerment, and disrupting public order as immediate concerns. He aimed to make an example of Leo, to send a clear message that individual hunches had no place in the structured world of public transport and infrastructure management. He quickly issued a public statement, disseminated through the few remaining functional radio stations and hand-delivered flyers, dismissing Leo's baseless claims of structural issues as dangerous misinformation that could incite public panic. The statement subtly hinted that Leo would very likely lose his license, emphasizing the DOT's commitment to data-driven safety. This public denouncement further cemented Leo's isolation, publicly discrediting him and turning public sentiment against him. The city, already on edge from the EMP, was thrown into further disarray by this public dispute. People, desperate for a sense of normalcy and control, gravitated towards official pronouncements. Leo, the quiet, intuitive driver, found himself cast as an antagonist, a potential threat to the fragile order. His old cab, which had been impounded by the DOT as part of the investigation, now sat in a sterile depot, a silent testament to his alleged recklessness. Meanwhile, Ms. Reed, having arrived at JFK only to discover her international flight was indefinitely delayed due to unforeseen air traffic control issues, another subtle, unacknowledged ripple effect of the EMP, simmered with a potent mixture of frustration and lingering anger. Her initial rage against Leo cooled slightly, replaced by a simmering annoyance at the universe. She still blamed him for the needless detour that had caused her so much distress, convinced he was a fraud. She meticulously organized her complaint, attaching the evidence photo she had snapped. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but to ensure that such dangerous irresponsibility was purged from the city's transport system. She believed she was acting for the greater good, oblivious to the dramatic irony that was about to unfold. The stage was set, the characters were in place, and the true ghost of the steel, unheard by most, was about to make its terrifying presence known. Leo, the quiet empath of infrastructure, stood alone against a world that refused to listen. His silent warnings drowned out by the noise of bureaucracy and the hubris of certainty. The sterile, fluorescent-lit hearing room in the Department of Transportation building hummed with an almost oppressive silence, broken only by the sharp click of a keyboard and the occasional cough from the assembled spectators. This was the official arena, a bastion of bureaucracy and data, where protocols reigned supreme and human intuition was considered a dangerous anomaly. Leo Maxwell, the veteran taxi driver, sat alone at a polished table, facing a formidable panel of skeptical DOT officials. His well-worn jacket seemed out of place amidst their crisp suits, his calloused hands a stark contrast to their manicured ones. This was his trial, a public reckoning for daring to trust a feeling over the infallible certainty of GPS. At the head of the panel sat Mr. Harrison, the DOT chief, his face a grim mask of professional severity. He embodied the rigid adherence to metrics and the dismissal of the unquantifiable. His thin lips were pressed into a tight line, his eyes, cold and analytical, fixed on the data displayed on a large screen behind him. He saw Leo not as a man with a unique perception, but as a disruptive element, a liability to a system that prided itself on precision. Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Harrison stated, his voice devoid of warmth, echoing in the hushed room. We are here to review your professional conduct and the serious complaint filed against you by Ms. Evelyn Reed, your route deviations, your alleged feelings about infrastructure integrity. These are grave concerns. Ms. Evelyn Reed sat in the front row, a figure of icy composure. She testified against Leo, her voice clear and precise, detailing the missed flight, the unnecessary detour, and Leo's erratic behavior. She painted him as unreliable, possibly unstable, and a clear danger to public trust. He nearly caused an accident, she concluded, her eyes flashing with lingering anger. He put my life, and my schedule, at risk with his bizarre hunches. The public, fueled by sensationalized news reports that had sensationalized Leo's madness, viewed him with a mix of amusement and suspicion, their faces a sea of judgment. Leo truly stood alone. His union, a massive, impersonal entity, offered only lukewarm support, fearing that defending such unconventional methods would set a dangerous precedent. perhaps even undermine their carefully negotiated safety protocols. They offered him a perfunctory lawyer, a young man who looked as bewildered by Leo's feelings as the rest of the panel. Leo found himself having to articulate the ineffable, to translate a visceral, internal warning into a language that data-driven bureaucrats could understand. He tried to explain the subtle vibrations, the unseen stresses, the low hum that spoke of a structure's fatigue. He spoke of the city having bones and a heartbeat. "Mr. Harrison scoffed, leaning forward. "Mr. Maxwell, this is precisely the kind of unsubstantiated rhetoric that we cannot tolerate. We operate on data, on engineering reports, on quantifiable assessments. Do you have any empirical evidence for these structural issues you claim to perceive?" He gestured to the screen behind him, which now displayed a detailed, digitally rendered report of the Viridia Bridge. The very bridge Leo had avoided. The report, generated by the DOT's sophisticated sensor network, declared the bridge structurally sound, fully compliant with all safety regulations, and capable of handling projected traffic loads for the next 2 decades. Harrison's voice dripped with triumph. "This report, Mr. Maxwell, is scientifically verified. Your claims are, to put it mildly, unfounded paranoia." The weight of the system pressed down on Leo. He had no data, no reports, no physical evidence that could stand against the gleaming certainty of Harrison's charts. All he had was a feeling, a deep, unshakable conviction, born from decades of silent observation and an inexplicable connection to the city's unseen pulse. Mr. Harrison, eager to make an example of Leo, to swiftly reaffirm the DOT's authority and the infallibility of their digital systems, pressed for an immediate decision. Given the lack of any credible evidence from Mr. Maxwell and the compelling testimony of Ms. Reed, I recommend an immediate and permanent revocation of Mr. Maxwell's taxi license. We simply cannot have a driver operating on intuition. He looked at the other panel members, expecting their assent. His intention was clear. Leo's driving career would be over by the end of the day. But then, as if the universe itself was determined to intervene, the sterile hum of the hearing room was pierced by a new sound. Not the measured tones of bureaucracy, but the urgent, chaotic blare of news sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing from the city outside. Simultaneously, a series of frantic beeps erupted from Mr. Harrison's own official, secured communication device on the table. His eyes widened slightly as he read the incoming text alerts, his composure momentarily faltering. Reports began to surface, spreading like wildfire through the few functioning radio channels, and the agitated whispers of the public a major citywide traffic jam was forming, caused by a small, unexpected accident on the very bridge Leo avoided, the Viridia Bridge. What began as a minor fender bender had rapidly escalated. The sheer volume of traffic, already heavy with the evening commute, was now gridlocked on the bridge, adding unprecedented structural stress to an already aging structure. News anchors, their voices breathless, reported that thousands of commuters were trapped on the bridge, their vehicles creating an unimaginable load. The bridge, once a symbol of connectivity, was rapidly turning into a ticking time bomb of congestion, and a symbol of vulnerability that only Leo's feeling had foreseen. Mayor Jenkins, watching the live news feeds from his office in City Hall, his face growing paler with each passing minute, barked frantic orders into his secure comms. His chief of staff, usually unflappable, stammered through updates. The DOT's own sensors on the bridge, after a brief, terrifying lag, were now blinking red, showing alarming, rapid degradation of structural integrity, far beyond anything the earlier sound report had indicated. Engineers were being dispatched, but they were miles away, battling the worsening traffic. The entire city's evening commute, its very pulse, was now relying on this one, dangerously overloaded bridge. In the hearing room, Mr. Harrison, his face a mask of dawning horror, looked from his flashing device to Leo. The cold, analytical certainty in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, primal fear. The abstract data on his screen was now manifesting as a terrifying, real-time crisis. The pressure on Leo was immense. He had to prove his improbable foresight against overwhelming skepticism before the bridge's true, catastrophic weakness was tragically revealed. The pendulum of doubt was swinging, and Leo, the quiet, ridiculed man, knew that the fate of thousands, and the vindication of his unique gift, hung in the agonizing balance. The clock was not just ticking on his license, it was ticking for the very lives of the city's trapped commuters. The sterile hum of the DOT hearing room was abruptly, violently shattered. The frantic emergency broadcast, now blaring from every speaker in the room, cut through the air with the chilling immediacy of a death knell. Urgent public safety alert. Repeat. Urgent public safety alert. The accident on the Viridia Bridge has escalated. Unprecedented structural stress detected. Commuters are trapped. Engineers report alarming. Rapid degradation of the main supports. All available units. Proceed to the Viridia Bridge immediately. The voice of the dispatcher, usually calm and modulated, was now strained with barely contained panic. On the massive screen behind Mr. Harrison, which had moments ago displayed a reassuring graph of structural integrity, live news footage flickered on, showing the Viridia Bridge, a monumental artery of steel and concrete, now choked with motionless vehicles. Above the gridlock, a terrifying sight visible swaying, a subtle, sickening undulation that made the stomach churn. The steel groaned, a sound picked up by the news cameras, amplifying the horror. Panic, cold and sharp, swept through the city, echoing in the hearing room as people gasped, some rising from their seats, their faces ashen. Mayor Jenkins, watching from his office in City Hall, his face etched with growing horror, barked frantic orders into his secure comms, his voice trembling. "No, this cannot be happening, Mr. Harrison bellowed, his face a mask of disbelief, his carefully constructed world of data crumbling before his eyes. This was Leo's crucible. He had watched the unfolding crisis with a quiet dread, the terrible vindication of his ignored warning. Now. He rose from his seat, his presence suddenly commanding, his voice, usually soft, resonating with an urgent authority that cut through the rising chaos in the room. "It is happening," Leo stated, his gaze fixed on Mr. Harrison, then sweeping to the live footage of the struggling bridge. "And it's worse than your sensors are telling you. The stress isn't just from the load. It's a foundational fatigue, a hidden flaw in the core support structure." He walked to the large display screen, ignoring the bewildered glances of the panel. His finger pointed directly at a specific section of the bridge's main support, near the central span, precisely the area he had experienced his most profound and unsettling feeling about during his drive with Ms. Reed. The microfractures in the concrete weren't just surface cracks, Leo explained, his voice gaining momentum, describing the bridge's unseen weakness with an astonishing level of detail. He wasn't guessing, he was perceiving, almost feeling the bridge's agony. They're an extension of deep-seated fatigue in the rebar connections within the main pillar, specifically the north pylon, about 50 feet down from the roadway. The original structural welds there, they're failing. Not visibly, not to your sensors, but the vibrational resonance is off. It's creating a harmonic instability that this kind of sustained stress will push past its breaking point. He pulled a pen from his pocket and, with surprising accuracy, began to sketch on a nearby whiteboard an internal diagram of the specific structural flaw he perceived, a series of crisscrossing lines showing stressed steel and fractured concrete that modern sensors had missed entirely. It's like an aneurysm in the city's heart. You won't see it until it bursts. His words, precise and horrifyingly specific, momentarily silenced the room. Ms. Reed, watching from the front row, stared at Leo, her initial fury replaced by a chilling premonition. Her hand instinctively went to her phone, pulling up the photograph she had taken days ago. the one meant as evidence against him. She zoomed in on the concrete pillar Leo had pointed to during their taxi ride. Her breath hitched. The faint hairline crack she had dismissed was indeed there, precisely where he had indicated, a silent, damning witness. Her face drained of color, her previous anger replaced by a dawning, icy terror. "This is preposterous," Mr. Harrison finally roared, trying to regain control, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're a taxi driver, Mr. Maxwell, not an engineer. This is speculation. We operate on facts, on data, not on your fantasies." He looked at the panel, then back at Leo, his eyes darting between Leo's unwavering gaze and the horrifying live feed. He hesitated, torn between the ingrained rigidity of protocol and the primal scream of panic now rising within him. The emergency broadcast continued, the voices more frantic, reporting that the bridge was now swaying violently, the groaning sounds intensifying. This was the held breath moment. Everyone in the room, from the skeptical officials to the terrified public, was fixed on the giant screen. The live feed showed a terrifying scene, the central span of the Veridia Bridge visibly dropping by several feet, then springing back with a terrifying rebound. A car, its occupants screaming, slid precariously close to the edge. The noise from the bridge was no longer a groan, but a deep, sickening metallic shriek, followed by loud cracks like gunshots. Just as Harrison, his hand trembling, dismissed Leo's desperate plea as a final, pathetic delusion and reached to confirm the license revocation, to silence Leo's voice forever, a deep, sickening rip tore through the live feed. A visible crack, massive and horrifying, appeared on the bridge's main support beam, precisely at the north pylon Leo had indicated. It snaked rapidly upwards, tearing through concrete and steel. Then, with a cataclysmic, earth-shattering roar that rattled the very foundations of the DOT building, the Veridia Bridge, precisely as Leo had described, succumbed to its unseen fault. It peeled apart, its massive segments collapsing into the murky river below in a monstrous cascade of twisted steel and pulverized concrete. The live image on the screen froze on the horrifying, dust-choked scene, a monument of urban devastation. A collective, guttural gasp ripped through the hearing room, followed by screams, then a profound, stunned silence. The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw emotion. Ms. Reed, clutching her phone, stared at the static image of the collapsed bridge, then at the photograph of the hairline crack on her screen, then back at Leo. Her face, utterly devoid of color, reflected a dawning, terrible realization. Her polished composure shattered, replaced by an overwhelming wave of guilt and horror. She whispered Leo's name. A mere breath. Mayor Jenkins, watching the full catastrophe unfold from his office, his face ashen, pounded his desk. He immediately issued frantic, desperate orders, mobilizing every available resource, a silent, terrible acknowledgement that Leo's warning had been horrifyingly real, tragically ignored. The reaction of those witnessing in the hearing room was visceral. From utter disbelief, their faces slowly shifted to dawning horror, then to profound, overwhelming awe, and finally, to a desperate, tearful gratitude. They looked at Leo, the unassuming taxi driver they had mocked and dismissed, and saw not an eccentric, but a living guardian, a man whose quiet, inexplicable wisdom had seen what their advanced systems could not. The ridicule evaporated, replaced by reverence. Leo Maxwell, the scorned taxi driver, was instantly transformed into a reluctant hero, his quiet, inexplicable foresight publicly vindicated in the most devastating, undeniable way possible. The city had lost a bridge, but it had gained a legend. And the unseen fault lines, both in the city's infrastructure and in its perception of knowledge, had been brutally exposed. The deafening roar of the collapsing Veridia Bridge, replayed endlessly on every functional screen and whispered in hushed, terrified tones across Neo Veridia, reverberated through the very core of the city's identity. It was a wound that would forever scar the landscape, but also a brutal, undeniable lesson. Mr. Harrison, the rigid dot chief, was utterly shattered by the catastrophe. The smug certainty that had defined his career evaporated, replaced by the profound, crushing weight of responsibility and guilt. The structural integrity report, once his infallible shield, was now a damning testament to his hubris. He didn't wait to be fired. In a terse, public statement delivered with a voice devoid of its usual authority, Mr. Harrison announced his immediate resignation from the Department of Transportation. He took full, unequivocal responsibility for dismissing Leo's warnings, his face a mask of humility and grief. "I put my faith in data alone," he stated, his gaze distant, and ignored the wisdom that saw beyond the numbers. "My oversight cost this city dearly." This public act of contrition, rare in the cutthroat world of city politics, marked his profound transformation. He wasn't just publicly disgraced, he was personally humbled. But unlike Alistair Finch, Harrison chose a path of redemption. He approached Leo, not with a request for forgiveness, but with an offer of unwavering support, becoming Leo's staunchest ally and a crucial helper in the daunting task of piecing the city back together. He provided invaluable administrative and logistical support, leveraging his deep understanding of city systems, albeit now viewed through the lens of humility. Ms. Evelyn Reed, her icy composure shattered by the horrifying visual of the bridge collapse, and the chilling realization that her own casual dismissal had almost cost her life, underwent an equally profound change. The photograph of the hairline crack on her phone, once a weapon against Leo, was now a constant, tormenting reminder of her short-sightedness. Guilt, raw and consuming, gnawed at her. She realized, with a clarity that stung, that her obsession with efficiency had blinded her to a deeper, more vital truth. She became Leo's most vocal and powerful advocate. Using her considerable influence in the corporate world, she immediately established a citywide, intuitive infrastructure monitoring initiative. This unique program championed Leo's methods, funding research into non-conventional perception and developing systems for incorporating human intuition into infrastructure safety protocols. She spoke tirelessly to the press, her voice now passionate and contrite, detailing her own arrogance and Leo's unwavering foresight, actively working to shift public perception. The public, in a state of collective shock and awe, now viewed Leo not as an eccentric, but as a living guardian. The ridicule he had endured for years evaporated, replaced by a profound reverence. Taxi drivers, once mocking, now stopped him at lights, seeking his advice on tricky routes or sharing their own, nascent feelings about the city's pulse. Children, too young to grasp the full horror of the collapse, but old enough to understand heroism, looked at him with wide, admiring eyes. Leo, the unassuming taxi driver, had become Neo Viridia's unlikely compass, its quiet, guiding force in a world relearning to navigate without its digital crutches. For Leo, there was no traditional job offer. The old bureaucratic structures were too slow, too rigid, too broken to contain his unique talent. Instead, the city, at the urging of a transformed Mr. Harrison and Miss Carter Reed, established a specialized, highly funded urban resonance division within the reformed Department of Public Works. Leo was appointed its lead consultant and chief infrastructure empath. He was given a dedicated team of open-minded engineers, architects, and urban planners, tasked with applying his intuitive knowledge to proactively identify weaknesses in the city's aging infrastructure. His work focused on bridges, tunnels, deep foundations, and even the subterranean network of pipes and cables that still secretly sustained parts of the city. This allowed him to fully utilize his unique talent, his ability to perceive the subtle stresses and hidden fault lines within structures, for the greater good, ensuring that such a catastrophe would never happen again. His old, beloved yellow cab, too damaged to drive, was meticulously restored and given a place of honor outside the new division's headquarters, a silent testament to its role in the city's salvation. Weeks later, a new, quieter hum settled over Neo Veridia. It was the sound of rebuilding, of communities working together, of people rediscovering forgotten skills. Leo sat with a visibly humbled Mr. Harrison and a deeply respectful Ms. Reed in a quiet corner of a newly established community center, an old, salvaged school gym now serving as a collaborative planning hub. Spread before them were blueprints for new, more resilient bridge designs, meticulously drawn, incorporating not just cutting-edge engineering, but also the resonance principles Leo had articulated. Ms. Reed, her voice soft with genuine regret, looked at Leo. "Leo," she said, her usual corporate jargon replaced by raw sincerity. "I judged you based on metrics, on efficiency, on what my screens told me. I never saw the true depth of your perception. I was blind, consumed by a world that no longer exists." She paused, a shadow of her former self, but with a new light in her eyes. How do we ensure we don't make that mistake again? How do we learn to listen to what you hear? Leo, stirring a cup of locally brewed herbal tea, his gaze distant, replied, "The city has its own heartbeat. Evelyn, a rhythm of steel and concrete, of water flowing underground, of the very earth it rests on. You just have to learn how to listen past the noise, past the blare of horns, the flicker of screens, the numbers that promise everything but show nothing real. Sometimes, the slowest path is the safest. The quietest whisper holds the most truth." Mr. Harrison, nodding slowly, added, "We forgot the human element, the unquantifiable. My models were perfect, but they couldn't feel the bridge's pain. You're feeling, Mr. Maxwell. That's the missing data point." They reflected on the delicate balance between data and intuition, the urgent need for new approaches to urban resilience that integrated both technological advancements and the profound, often inexplicable, insights of human perception. They spoke of a future where engineers would not just build with strength, but with a deeper understanding of the soul of their creations, where city planners would consider the whispers of the steel as seriously as any sensor reading. The profound, humbling lessons learned from the collapse of the Veridia Bridge had forged a new path. A path towards a city built on empathy, foresight, and an enduring connection to the very foundations of its existence. 3 years later, Midtown Manhattan, scarred yet not broken, had begun a slow, deliberate, and profound transformation. It was still the bustling, vibrant metropolis, its canyons of glass and steel reaching for the sky. But beneath the surface, a revolutionary shift had taken root. The relentless pursuit of hyper-efficiency had given way to a newfound appreciation for robustness, redundancy, and, most remarkably, human intuition in its infrastructure. The city's pulse was no longer solely defined by digital data streams, but by a complex, harmonious interplay between cutting-edge engineering and the subtle, almost artistic, soft monitoring techniques championed by Leo Maxwell. Green spaces, once a luxury, were now integrated into urban planning, and human-scaled architecture began to temper the imposing dominance of the skyscrapers, creating a city that felt more connected to its human inhabitants. Leo Maxwell, the quiet taxi driver who had become an unwitting prophet, was now a beloved and revered figure across Neo Veridia. His days were no longer spent in anonymous commutes, but in purposeful drives, his subtle insights guiding major urban planning decisions. He held no official government title that the old world would recognize, but his influence was undeniable. He was the city's unacknowledged conscience, its living seismograph for structural integrity. He spent his time not only identifying potential weaknesses in aging bridges, tunnels, and deep foundations, but also mentoring a new generation of engineers and urban planners. He taught them to listen to the subtle cues of the city, to understand its non-quantifiable rhythms, to feel the strain in the steel, the whisper of worn concrete. His old taxi, the very vehicle that had carried Ms. Reed on that fateful day, now stood proudly, meticulously maintained, outside the newly established Urban Resonance Division headquarters, a poignant symbol of foresight vindicated. Passers-by would often stop, pointing, a quiet reverence in their eyes. He was greeted with waves and smiles from pedestrians and fellow drivers alike, his quiet presence a reassurance that the city was now truly listening. Driven by the overwhelming success of the Urban Resonance Division and the undeniable need for a broader understanding of his unique approach, Leo, with the unwavering financial and logistical support of Ms. Evelyn Reed's powerful foundation, established the Maxwell Institute for Urban Intuition. This nonprofit organization became a global pioneer, dedicated to exploring and training individuals and developing heightened sensory and intuitive awareness for infrastructure safety. The institute didn't just teach engineering, it taught feeling. It hosted workshops for city planners, architects, and even ordinary citizens, encouraging them to hone their observational skills, to trust their gut instincts, and to recognize the subtle signs of structural distress that often eluded even the most sophisticated sensors. The Institute ran powerful public awareness campaigns, using striking visuals and compelling testimonials, including Ms. Reed's own, incredibly frank story of initial skepticism and ultimate belief to highlight the critical importance of human observation and intuitive perception in an increasingly automated world. It was a call to reclaim a vital human capacity that had been nearly lost. Beyond the formal institute, Leo remained deeply connected to the community. He volunteered at numerous community centers across the revitalized city, conducting informal sessions where he taught simple observation techniques to ordinary citizens. He would take groups on walks, pointing out subtle shifts in pavement, the way a building settled, the nuanced sounds of traffic on a bridge. He empowered them to become vigilant eyes and ears for the city, creating a decentralized network of human sensors, fostering a collective responsibility for urban safety. He instilled in them a profound understanding that the city was a living entity, and that its well-being depended on the collective awareness of its inhabitants. The story culminates on a crisp, clear autumn afternoon. Leo, a faint smile playing on his lips, drove his new, quieter, but still robust, taxi across a newly constructed bridge. It was a marvel of modern engineering, yet its design subtly incorporated his resonance principles, its very structure harmonizing with the natural vibrations of the river below. The bridge hummed with a healthy, balanced vibration, a deep, reassuring pulse that only Leo, with his unique gift, could truly perceive. He glanced into his rearview mirror, seeing the gleaming skyline of Neo Veridia, now tempered with an abundance of green spaces, rooftop gardens, and human-scaled architecture that invited connection rather than isolation. His journey had come full circle. He was no longer just a taxi driver navigating concrete jungles. He was a humble guardian, a quiet legend. His intuition now a cornerstone of the city's resilience. He felt the city's pulse, its vibrant, unseen currents, beating stronger and safer than ever before. The future was not a perfect utopia, but it was a testament to humanity's capacity to learn, to adapt, and to find wisdom in the most unexpected places. Leo Maxwell, the man who listened to the whispers of the steel, drove forward, guiding a city where intuition and data now danced in a quiet, profound harmony, ensuring that the next chapter of its story would be one of enduring strength. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that true wisdom often hides in plain sight and that listening to the quietest whispers can save us from the loudest calamities, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.